name's Lee Foster Wilson and I'm an artist and illustrator from Cornwall in the UK. Today's video is all about how hard it is sometimes just to get started on a new piece of art. Why is it that every so often, even though in that moment we want nothing else more than to be creating and making, it's just on occasion really difficult to just get going? So while I explore this idea, I thought I'd share with you a new piece of work coming together. And yes, it's me actually doing the work in that moment, but sometimes the process of getting into that flow state isn't quite so easy. I hope you enjoy this video, and if you do, please do give it a thumbs up. And if you don't already, consider subscribing because it really helps and gives small channels like mine a really good boost. Thank you, and on with the video. Recently, I started a new body of work, and it's centred around the coast. And as I delve deeper, I'm drawn to all the little details like the shells and the seaweed and the fish. But each time I sit down at my desk with a few lovely hours stretching ahead to make the art, a kind of resistance creeps in, and it kind of comes out as procrastination and doing other stuff, busying myself. And it takes me a while to actually get around to making the first mark of the day. And even when I am making, until I get into the flow, little distractions creep in. Thoughts on things I should look up, other ideas are like bouncing around in my head that may or may not need researching right there and then. It turns out that it's true what they say, that starting is the hardest part. But why? The blank page is a scary place, all of that possibility of greatness, but also of awfulness, which is hard to push aside. One is stifling, just think what it could become, and the other is the fast road to a perceived personal failure. Neither of them are very conducive to making any kind of start. I've been thinking a lot about that push and pull of making the first mark and getting started, and then serendipitously came across the idea of creative resistance from Stephen Pressfield, who outlines creative resistance as a force that stops you from doing the thing that you were born to do. His ideas on it are a lot more nuanced and in-depth than the little bit I've heard about, and I haven't yet read any of his books, though I have just bought one. But it came to dawn on me that all of the procrastination we experience when skirting around the edges of actually making the work is this creative resistance. In my as yet limited understanding of it so far, it's that feeling of fear that I talked about earlier, that it could become something so great we may never be able to make anything of its like again. Of course, that's not true. Or it could become something awful, and thus reaffirming any self-doubt or imposter syndrome that niggles away at, I presume, anyone worth their salt. If that doesn't happen to you, then I envy you greatly. Also, that sometimes making art is hard, so we put it off. There are always easier things to do instead of putting ourselves in the uncomfortable place of doing the difficult work and risking making a mistake. I know this feeling well, especially when starting new projects or finishing something that I'm so far pleased with. There's always a dance around making the work, even if I'm excited about it. I like to pull together mood boards, make little thumbnails, colour palettes, write list after list after list. It feels creative and productive, but it's still not doing the actual work, actually getting the paper out to draw on. That is just another leap. After seeing a video on creative resistance and then hearing about it a couple of times on podcasts recently, it was almost like I had like a light bulb moment that, of course, that's what this is, that's what I'm experiencing. For me, it's a fear of not knowing what to draw or paint, even when I have done all my research and know roughly what it is I would like to make art about. It's kind of also a fear that I will get it wrong, that my art won't look like I envisage, or even that I don't really have a vision, just a muddled amalgamation of other people's work mushed together and blobbing around in my head, which kind of makes me feel like a phony. But this is the moment to just start, which sounds easy enough, but if you've been there, you'll know that it's not. There's a quick scroll of social media to do, or maybe something to list on Vinted, or a window to be stared out of which reminds you haven't fed the birds. And then when you're out there, here's a few weeds that need seeing to, and suddenly a whole hour has passed and it's time to do the school run, and that's all your time up for another day, and you feel really shit that you still haven't made any art. I've been there, and each time I start a new piece of art, I'm there. Sometimes the resistance is strong, like the wasted afternoon I've just described, and sometimes it's just there in the paper in front of me, goading me for that first mark. Don't get it wrong, Lee. I think once you can recognise resistance, that thing that steps in your way, i.e. yourself and your own fears, it becomes easier to overcome it. Tell it to be on its way so you can just begin, which is often very stop-start anyway, but often, little by little, just keeping on going sets off a chain reaction. I have found in the past, to get properly started on new work, that it's important to let loose of any preconceived ideas of what it should look like and just let it flow. I experiment on cheap paper in a sketchbook and try not to be too precious. Somehow, just beginning breeds more inspiration. It's like a rolling snowball picking up speed. Once the work starts, then ideas come, and then the world starts to appear in a new way, a place ripe for harvesting. I find that then I move through it seeking out shapes that I can incorporate into my work. I mostly forget them, but the good ones stick, and I start to feel excited to get back to my drawing table and get going again. Even though each time I sit down to start, there is that resistance, served up as hesitation, that I might ruin what I started yesterday or make a mess. I try to remember that most of the time it ends up good enough, and unless I'm putting anything on that paper, the work won't be getting done. Sometimes what appears from the end of my pens and pencils and brushes isn't at all how I imagined it would turn out, but that's okay. I think this is also a key to finding style, but that's for another time. It's always a work in progress, but I'm trying to just embrace what happens and own it as mine. So the art of making a start is really an exercise in overcoming resistance. Recognise it, tell it that actually you really want to make this work today, know it will be hard, but begin anyway, and just keep going. It probably won't feel all that great to start with, but somewhere in there will be something you like that excites you and makes you want to make more, and then you just have to keep going, pulling out the good bits, learning from the bad bits, and eventually you'll find your flow. I think perhaps we separate it from the activity of making art too much, but as difficult as it is sometimes, I think starting is just another part of the process. So, do the work. But before you do that, give this video a like. Thank you. I'll see you next time.